All right, so we are through May, and from a profit loss standpoint, I'm pretty thrilled. This is my best month in over a year since April of 2015, and I do owe a lot of it to a big MGT trade, but the last couple weeks of the month felt like overall very solid trading. But trading is about more than just money, it is about more than just profit loss. It really does matter how did you get there. Did you stick within your plan, follow your rules, or did you break your rules and get lucky? Those things make a difference long term. And as you can see by the calendar here, the first couple weeks for me were not good at all. They were very, very sloppy. I had a lot of mistakes the first 2 weeks of the month. And really, what happened to me was I fell into the trap that I said I didn't want to fall into at the end of my April trading recap. I came into the month thinking way too much about profit loss. I had just had a big month. I was taking a step up in size. Instead of trusting things to take care of themselves, I really was pressing a bit. I wanted to make things happen. And the first day of the month, I guess I was good. I mean, I remember that day I traded very conservatively. I only made a few trades, and I got off to a good start, $6,000. But then things slowed down a little bit, and I started making mistakes. Really, the main problem here early in the month was that I started trying to do more. I was very confident after April. And the result of that confidence, the result of that good trading meant that I was allowed to up my risk to $2,500 coming into the month. But I tried to take it a step further. I started trying to trade more setups. And that's one of the hardest things to do when you're on a hot streak, is to keep disciplined and keep to what you're good at. For me, I said, well, I've been nailing things all of April, so now in May, I'm going to try this setup and this setup and this setup. And then I was playing them normal size instead of trying to play them smaller. So when I started getting burned by some of these unusual setups that I don't normally go after, that got frustrating, and that affected my profit loss. And then that led to the next round of mistakes, which was not wanting to cut losers. I had a couple very stubborn trades early. So never let anyone tell you the mental side of trading isn't tough, because it definitely is. And it's unfortunate it took me a couple of weeks to kind of get myself under control, because even though I had a great month, I think this really could have been a truly spectacular one if I had been a little more disciplined for those first 2 weeks. Let's just start by running down some of these losses that I took that were so undisciplined and silly. First one was OZRK on May 4th, and that was a Muddy Waters hit piece, I believe. Basically, they bashed the stock, it got crushed, and then it rebounded. And I don't try to nail those quick because I'm never fast enough, but I always like to wait for the rebound to try to short. It's a setup that I just played again for the first time, I think, back in April or March. It had been a long time since I had tried one of these, and it worked in March or April or whenever I traded the last one. So this time, I said, oh, I think it'll work again. And hey, it's Muddy Waters, which for those of you who follow some of these short bash articles, Muddy Waters is one of the bigger names. They usually have pretty decent reports. So I just trusted that the bounce would fade, and I kind of just piled into a short without giving any real thought to what my risk was. And it turns out I just sized myself in too big. So it was a setup that wound up not working. I did cut it about where I planned on, but since my size was so big, I lost 3,200, and I shouldn't be losing, more than my $2,500 risk on a setup I don't normally play, or that I very rarely play. I probably shouldn't have even been full size on that. Especially for one like this, where it really is a little more fundamentally surrounded than my typical kind of trade. I mean, yes, I'm trying to wait for the bounce to short sell, which is a technical side of it, but I mean, the quality of the hit piece, the quality of the report, what kind of bombshells they have to drop, I mean, that's going to affect how the stock behaves, how strong rebounds are. And I didn't really look into that too much. I didn't really have a sense of that. And so the stock did wind up holding together pretty well. I had mistimed my entry. I played it too big, and that's why I took a bigger loss than I should have here. So the next day, what did I do? I came in and I made another mistake on SYNC. This time, it was a failure to cut loss. I was shorting in the afternoon. The stock was spiking up towards VWAP. It had a decent amount of overhead resistance, but I knew my risk point. I was risking off a 345. I was sized in to play off a 345. Part of the push up there was, I believe it was a buy alert from a chat room, and a lot of subscribers chased that alert and spiked it up. And I do like to short sell those sometimes, where you get a bunch of chasers who create this artificial spike and the stock fades right back off. So I came into it a little bit overconfident, thinking, hey, there's no way this fails, and I just wasn't willing to lose, because when my risk level came and went, I didn't take it all off. I think I only sized down slightly. And I went on a bit of a ride with it too, even. I wound up covering dips. I got out for not too bad of a loss. I still only lost about 3,500 on this one. But again, beyond my risk. That's the reason this loss was so big. And I managed to close out the week without any more dumb mistakes. And, that end of the first week, I was up about $6,000, just under. And I felt fortunate to have gotten out of the week that green, given how sloppy I was. But at the same time, I still had in the back of my head, hey, I'm trading bigger this month. I had bigger expectations for myself. I was, a little annoyed that things weren't going as well as they had gone in April. And I really tried to be at peace with that and go into the next week with a clear head and just sort of start the month fresh. And I failed. I failed at doing that because I came out the next week and I made two big mistakes on the 11th. It probably didn't help that the 9th and the 10th were both small red days. Because, again, I was cutting losses, I was following rules those days, but the profit loss didn't turn out in my favor. And again, that just kind of leads to a little bit more of, oh no, we're getting further along in the month. Things aren't going well. I'm not achieving the goals that I want. Even though, I really shouldn't even have those goals in the first place. It still was affecting me. And so the 11th, the frustration kind of boiled over. It started with MGT in the morning, and that was, way back when MGT was first starting to run. MGT's first day after the press release had been, it had closed green, but the daily candle was red. It had opened up in the mid-60s and faded off and closed under 50 cents. And the second day it gapped up and it squeezed up into the 80s and then faded a bit into the close, closing in about the 72 or 73 cent area. And I just came into the morning with the wrong bias on that. I really probably should have been thinking breakout because it broke past the 68 cent high area from that first day of the press release. And it held that level into the close, even though it closed weak. But instead of thinking breakout, instead of thinking, hey, this could squeeze, I had a short bias because I was a little too focused on the fact that it had faded off into the close. And so in the morning, when it had a really weak gap up and it was propping with a big bid, I slammed in short. And my idea on this short going into the day, my plan for the day had been I'm going to risk off of 86, which was the previous day's high. And when I slammed into this short first thing in the morning because it was such a weak gap up, I played it big. I think I took 40,000 shares short. And I said to myself, okay, you know what? I'm going to, instead of risking off of 86, I'll just play this with a tighter risk. And if it fails to go red, I'll just cover it all up real quick for that tiny loss. And then I didn't want to take the tiny loss because I was tired of losing after the past couple of days, after the two small red days. And all of a sudden I found myself on a ride because MGT, it supported, it squeezed up, and then it blew right through 86. So, even if I had cut at 86, I was in too big. I would have been losing about $5,000 at that point. And so it blew through 86. I knew I was in too big. I didn't want to cut at 86 because of that reason. And then I believe it topped out at about 94 cents and faded back off. And it faded hard. It came all the way back down towards my entry. I only took off 10,000 of my shares for break even. And I kept waiting for it to break down. I kept waiting for my loser to turn into a winner. It's kind of fallen back into old habits that are not so good. And instead, it supported, it grinded back, and I was forced to take off the rest of my shares as it was breaking past the 94 cent high of day. Thank goodness I did, because then it squeezed up into the 120s, and for, the days past, we all know it went well beyond the 120s. So, I'm glad I took it off still in the 94 area, but it wound up being a little over a $6,000 loss, which is just way too much. And while all that was going on, while I knew that I was in a stubborn MGT short, CCXI, that was another one where it was spiking into prior day's resistance. And I tried to get in with that prior day's high as my risk. And I wasn't sized in that big. It would have only been about a $1,500 loss. And the stop point came and went. I didn't take it off. And I got squeezed. And I went on a ride. And I had to take off into dips later for minus 4,700. And it's too bad because I actually had a decent day aside from those two big losers. My day only ended down $3,900 despite two huge mistakes that totaled almost $11,000. So that would have been a good day to get my month back on track if it had not been for my own boneheadedness. My last mistake of the first half of the month came a couple days later on that Friday the 13th on MGT again. We finally had a nice overextended gap down. And that is a setup that works the majority of the time. I have no regrets about entering the position. I have no regrets about not taking any off into the morning fade. even though it didn't continue to break down. But it did come back on me, and it did wind up going green, and it did wind up breaching my risk point. And once again, I just was a little bit slow to take the position off. I didn't want to believe that the setup wasn't working. And, I don't care what setup you're trading. No setup is going to work 100% of the time. You have to be willing to lose. You have to be willing to take it off in the cases where it doesn't. And, I guess I did a decent job here still. I was out maybe only a dime past my risk, but it still was past my risk. And I still did lose 3,200, which is more than I wanted to lose on this setup. And that, again, just kind of came from frustration. My winner turning into a loser. I was getting a little bit too emotionally attached to MGT at that point. So it was a really sloppy first 2 weeks of the month. And, I went into that weekend and kind of just got myself to reset mentally. And that time I was a lot more successful, where I just kind of said, what the heck am I doing? Like, this is ridiculous. I can't trade like this. I'm being a complete idiot. So I went back to hard stops for like a day just because I wanted to make sure I actually was stopping out and getting myself back in the habit. But that third week is where I started to turn things around. The 16th, my big win was I recognized the breakout on MGT. I got long some. I didn't ride it for nearly long enough, but I still at least made a nice profit off of it. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, if you haven't watched it yet, check out my MGT trading recap video. It's on YouTube because I really break down in detail what I did on that Tuesday and Wednesday with MGT. Once it really started to get silly and once I decided, hey, this is one worth going after really hard. So I was fortunate with the timing of that big MGT win. It really did get my month back on track, and I think that did help really calm me down mentally. I also was on vacation, so I didn't trade that Thursday and Friday of that week, which turned out to be a little bit frustrating for me because I look back on it and I see that, there were some really perfect setups that Thursday and Friday that I wish I had been a part of. But the nice 4-day weekend there gave me a good mental refresher. And then for the most part, I just came out and crushed it the week after that. Very disciplined trading, very solid trading. I really took a lot of confidence from that MGT play because those couple days where it mattered most, I was cutting my losses. I was getting out when I needed to get out. And in those moments where I am playing something bigger, where I am really trying to attack, it was just such a confidence boost to see myself following rules and doing just a perfect job. I did make one more mistake the rest of the month. It was that Monday the 23rd. I did come out a bit over aggressive on MGT. It had held about a 320 top for a couple days in a row ever since its big collapse. And I just thought that since it was gapping up that day, that it was going to have a nice squeeze back towards 4. It was through that 320 level. And I grabbed some long, and I started off sized inappropriately, but I had an ad after market open that really wasn't that great and put my risk a little bit out of control. So I just played that one a little bit too big, but I still stopped out exactly when I was supposed to. And no real regrets on where I stopped out there. I just came out pushing size a little too much because I was a little overconfident from the week before. But once I got that under control the rest of Monday, I was good the rest of the week. I was good into this Tuesday the 31st. So it really was the tale of two halves of the month for me. Aside from that big MGT breakdown that I managed to be short for, and then the bounce play that I shorted, again, the details you can see in my MGT trading recap video, one of the big money makers for me this month was just the multi-day breakout pattern. Some of you have asked that I talk a little bit about a few of my winning trades each month, so I'm going to try to start doing that. But the multi-day breakouts this month that really helped boost the month for me, first of all, XGTI on May 23rd. That was just a gorgeous breakout past the 16 cent area. And I didn't do a perfect job of selling that, but I was just taking it off into strength along the way, got out about a 24 cent average. And because I had gotten a nice entry near my risk, that added up really quick. Fannie Mae, I've got the free DVD clip on YouTube of me trading Fannie Mae from a couple of years ago. And here was another multi-day breakout example, breaking past the 218 level. And I bought the morning it was breaking past finally. I got in around a 220 average. So very close to my risk. Again, I was able to take a good number of shares. And I just stayed patient with it and finally got rid of it this Tuesday morning at about maybe 238 or 237 average. I was just trying to stay patient until I felt like the trend was changing. UPLMQ, I mean, that was another great example of multi-day breakouts. I was really upset that I missed the 53-cent breakout when I was on vacation. I actually had my laptop up and I was looking at it and then got distracted. And when I came back, it was too late. I had missed it. But that one squeezed great up into the 80s. And then it consolidated for a few days and then broke past the 85-cent area. And the 85-cent breakout is the one I bought. And I sold all of my shares on that breakout up near $1.01. So multi-day breakouts, I mean, still one of my favorite long patterns, really the only long pattern I'm good at. So hopefully we stay in a bit bullish of a market and we keep seeing plenty of these going forward. But as a setup, I definitely want to make sure I keep on playing. So before we wrap up, just to check in on some of these annual stats I've been tracking. I mean, you can see that pretty much all of my top wins for the year came in this month now. Skies was the only one that stayed on this list from April. Otherwise, it's all just trades that happened in May. But unfortunately, I have a lot more new top losers in there. CPXX, that is still my worst one. I'm glad that I at least didn't have my worst loser of the year this month during all of my sloppiness. But I did have a couple MGT mistakes. I think one of those losses, the $7,800 one, that was, I was just playing that big. That was one of the times I was really aggressively going after it. So that wasn't so much a mistake as it was a choice. But the $6,000 MGT loss was certainly a mistake. The $6,000 CPXX loss, that was from a different month, I believe. The CCXI loss, the $4,600 one, that was also a mistake. But obviously that big MGT collapse, that kind of set the stage for some new bests. I mean, it was my best day of it was my best day of the year. And it was nice to see it was also better than my best day of 2015. In May, I did not have a new worst day of the year. I had my two best weeks. I also unfortunately had one of my worst weeks of the year, though. My second worst week of the year came the week of May 8th through 15th. But despite the sloppiness, May did wind up being my best month of the year so far. And I'm really excited going into June. I feel like I ended the month really strong. So the big decision I have going into June is whether or not I want to increase my risk or not. And it's a tough decision because, like I said, those first 2 weeks were really sloppy. But then I did cut the losses when it really mattered on MGT during the big run-up. I did have a very disciplined second half of the month. So I've given it a good amount of thought, and I do think that I'm going to go ahead and up myself to $3,000 risk. Normally I would feel like I hadn't really earned it since there were a total of 6 mistakes this month, but just those 2 days of MGT run where I was cutting losses, I really feel like I proved something to myself those days. And I feel ready. The whole point of trading smaller in the first place was to kind of keep the damage under control a bit while I got my discipline back. Obviously, the larger I'm trading, the larger the mistakes are going to be when I make them. But since I finished the month so strong, since I feel ready, I'm going to go ahead and take that step. So $3,000 risk for the month of June. And I'm just going to try my absolute hardest not to attach myself to monetary goals and to just trust that the plays will be there this month. What will be, will be. I do not want to press like I was the first half of May. And if I make even one mistake in these first couple of weeks where I don't cut a loss, I'm going to go hard stops for a day or two, get myself back in the habit. I'm not going to let it turn into a little bit of a slippery slope like I did last month and I just made mistake after mistake after mistake. And I do get comments sometimes from you guys where you're asking me, like, why don't you just keep on using hard stops? It might seem silly that I keep on getting away from them and then making mistakes. But that's kind of the whole point, is I want to get myself to the point where I'm self-sufficient, where I don't need the computer to stop me out, where I can do it myself and I have that level of discipline. That's really important to me, to be able to do that and have that kind of self-control. So there's definitely going to be mistakes along the way. I'm not going to be perfect. I know I'm going to make mistakes going down the road. But slowly but surely, I do expect that discipline to develop. And I'm just going to keep on testing myself and giving myself chances to succeed. But this month, I'm going to give myself a lot less wiggle room if I'm failing. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope May was a great month for all of you as well. And let's hope that June gives us plenty of action. Good luck trading, everyone.